Have you ever heard someone say that evolution is only about changes in living things and has nothing to do with ideas like the Big Bang or geology or even the origin of life? It's a debate tactic I've encountered many times. You see, it allows an evolutionist to frame the origins debate and define the terms that will be used in conversation in the most positive and favorable way possible for them. Why? Well, first, by describing evolution as simply changes in living things, they can automatically structure the debate as if science-denying creationists are arguing against observational science. Everyone knows there are biological changes that can be observed in creatures over time, but that doesn't equate to evolution in action. Secondly, by narrowing the discussion to so-called biological evolution, they can avoid the many problems involved in broader conversations surrounding the origins debate. Some problems include the impossibility of life coming into existence from non-life, the massive rift in their explanations of how rocks and fossils found within them are supposed to have formed, and the fact that many evolution-believing astronomers are now abandoning the Big Bang because of the gaping inconsistencies within it. Unless defined beforehand as a discussion specifically about so-called biological evolution, the insistence that the term evolution should be limited only to the topic of biology is shallow on the face of it. And should anyone argue that the idea of evolution has nothing to do with cosmology or geology or first life, simply get them to go to a book retailer like Amazon.com and type in keywords like cosmic evolution, geological evolution, and chemical evolution and see the reams of book titles that appear with similar names. Here's just a tiny sampling of several books advertised on Amazon under these categories. The fact is, you can open almost any book on science and you will almost always see the same idea. Whether you're discussing the cosmos, chemistry, geology, genetics, or the Earth's geography, all of reality is described to have originated through some kind of naturalistic process and then proceeded to evolve into what we see today. And a perfect example of this comes from National Geographic's The Science Book, Everything You Need to Know About the World and How It Works. Published in 2008, it basically reads like a proverbial Bible for naturalists, as it conforms to a completely materialistic worldview. Its foreword, titled Science, the Essence of Cool, was written by Marshall Brain, the founder of the website HowStuffWorks.com. And in it, he begins by rhetorically asking what science is. And after explaining that he's discussed the matter for years with various people, he then gives his personal definition. And see if you notice something that stands out towards the end. Science is the coolest thing that human beings do. Science is humankind trying to figure out how absolutely everything in the universe works. It is that pure and simple. Science knows no boundaries. Science wants to take it all apart and say, okay, we get it. In an ideal universe, we will even figure out where our universe came from. Now, I don't think anyone would have a problem with the first part where he describes science as a tool to discover how things work, because that involves the scientific method, where you can set up experiments and repeatedly observe the results. But how exactly could you set up an experiment showing the universe coming into existence, a historical event, and then repeat that experiment? He then asks another question. But is that really what science is? Just to make sure, I did what any normal person would do. I consulted the dictionary. And what did he find and reference as the true definition of science? Systematic knowledge of the physical or material world, gained through observation and experimentation. Now, this definition is exactly what I just mentioned. Empirical science is based on repeated experimentation and direct observation. And yet, what was his conclusion about that official definition? That is so wrong. The dictionary has taken the most exciting things human beings do and has made it as boring as possible. Now, of course, he's being a bit hyperbolic here, and perhaps we can understand that he's just trying to get people hyped up about science. But he's forced to admit, I guess the definition is right in a technical sense, but talk about a letdown. Interestingly, he then goes on a rather long, rambling explanation over the next few pages, discussing his experience writing the foreword on an airplane and describing several mechanical systems and technical principles involved in how the jet functions and how wonderful flying is because it was all brought about by science. And again, I think anyone, regardless of their worldview, would agree. All of that technical proficiency he describes was brought about through the exact definition of science that he ironically said is wrong and boring, through repeatable observation and experimentation. But here's where it really gets interesting. By page 15, he begins to blend his materialistic worldview into his definition of science. Where does science come from? Here is what science tells us right now. Now, I'll have to skip much of his dialogue for brevity, but I'll give you the key pieces of this remarkable story that he insists is science, and I'll let you look it up yourself if you want more details. So, how did it all start? There was a big detonation, i.e. the Big Bang, that marked the beginning of our universe. The explosion condensed into space that was filled with immense amounts of hydrogen gas. The hydrogen atoms harbored inside of themselves an attractive force that we call gravity. The hydrogen atoms started fusing into heavier and heavier atoms. Out of such dispersed debris came a cloud that, again through gravity, produced our solar system, i.e. cosmic evolution, and the planet we call Earth, i.e. geological evolution. On this planet of water, there were all the chemicals needed for uncountable chemical reactions to occur spontaneously. The atoms and molecules chained together in such a way that they possessed the ability to produce copies of the chains, which is a reaction that we refer to as life, i.e. chemical evolution. Simple living things, through a process of mutation and selection, became more complex cells. Finally, plants and animals, i.e. biological evolution, until one day there was a species on Earth that embodies what we call general intelligence, i.e. human evolution. With that intelligence comes language, learning, logic, love, and lo and behold, curiosity. And from that curiosity comes science. Now, do you get it? Supposedly, life on Earth is the outcome of unguided, naturalistic evolutionary processes that occurred over billions of years. No God required. But notice how he attempts to apply the intellectual credibility typically gained by someone using the term science to justify an entire story that lacks the ability to perform even one repeatable, observable, scientific experiment to verify it. Can you set up an experiment in a lab demonstrating the Big Bang and cosmic evolution? No. Can you repeat an experiment showing the formation of Earth over and over again? No. Can you demonstrate life coming from non-living chemicals? No. Do you have repeatable, observable experiments demonstrating one kind of creature turning into a different kind? For example, a lizard-like creature turning into a bird? No. Can you set up an experiment in a laboratory showing me ape-like creatures turning into people over hundreds of thousands of years? No. So the story of evolution isn't supported by the very concept evolutionists are constantly trotting out to attempt to legitimize their worldview, empirical science. But as Mr. Brain opined, the definition of science is knowledge of the physical or material world gained through observation and experimentation. Yet again, no one has observed any of the 5 pillars of their materialistic faith: cosmic, geological, chemical, biological, or human evolution. And none of them can be demonstrated experimentally. But as you thumb through the rest of this rather monolithic 431-page tome, it constantly toggles between descriptions of a wide variety of technology, which were all brought about by the scientific method, what Mr. Brain described as boring, and apparently much more exciting, unobservable, non-repeatable, made-up stories about the supposed origin of everything, none of which can be demonstrated through empirical science. And so, the undiscerning walk away thinking that everything being discussed is scientific, when really it's just the skin of science stuffed with the religion of humanism, being presented as one concept. Now, having covered this, I want to get back to my original point as to why many evolutionists insist that the term evolution only be applied to the study of biology. The reason's simple. Faced with the reality that none of their other stories can be demonstrated scientifically, they're desperate to show evolution in action to the world in order to validate their worldview. But the only way they can do that is to diminish the definition of evolution to the point that it becomes completely impotent to anyone with a clear understanding of the field of modern genetics. And what do I mean by that? Well, the distinguished biochemist and evolutionist Dr. Gerald Kirkut defined the big picture of what evolution means in the following way. The theory that all the living forms in the world have arisen from a single source, which itself came from an inorganic form. Now that's easy for anyone to grasp because it mirrors what Charles Darwin taught in his Tree of Life diagram. Simply put, it means evolutionists believe that there was once no life on Earth. Then there was the first living thing that came into being, and then the resultant offspring of that supposed first life form were then somehow slowly modified, which resulted in every living thing that has ever been on the planet, including us. And if that story were actually true, then the type of change or genetic modification that would have been required to turn pond scum into people would have been truly remarkable. It would have had to have been the type of creative activity far beyond all of mankind's combined creative accomplishments throughout history. And what do I mean by that? Well, consider that this supposed first living thing would only have had the genetic information for the bare minimum capabilities and requirements to survive. Presumably, it wouldn't have had eyes or teeth or flippers or lips or hearts or lungs or sonar capabilities, the ability to use photosynthesis, camouflage, night vision, fur, scales, protective or hunting instincts, feathers, preening glands for those feathers, or muscles or bones, or migratory instincts, etc. All of those incredible capabilities that creatures have and the forms and functions and features that allow them to perform the brilliant things that you see when you watch a David Attenborough special would have had to have been created over the supposed billions of years through some kind of mechanism that could create brand new functional genetic information. But again, that hasn't been observed and can't be experimentally verified. So, in order to show observational support for the story of evolution, the term biological evolution is now often simply described as changes in gene frequencies in a population over time, or descent with modification, or even more simply, as just changes in living things. This is then designated under the term microevolution. And of course, because it can be experimentally demonstrated, evolutionists use this to crow about how silly the creationists are for denying observational science and lying about science when they say that evolution has never been observed. The problem is, creationists don't deny any of the observational science that's labeled as microevolution, because the changes that are touted as proof of evolution through this process don't evolve anything. Nothing they demonstrate contradicts the Genesis account where God stated 10 times that He created creatures to reproduce according to their kinds. These mechanisms don't create new forms, functions, and features that never existed previously. They're simply the result of a rearrangement of already existing genetic information or the result of deleterious information-damaging genetic mutations. But don't take my word for it. To demonstrate, let's go to the prestigious University of Berkeley's website, where we find an article titled Mechanisms of Microevolution. Ranked in 2024 as the US's #1 public university for 9 of the last 10 years, and currently ranked 8th worldwide. Berkeley should be able to provide world-class examples of evolution in action, right? So what are the 4 mechanisms they show? Well, to set the stage, they're using the example of changes in a population of beetles to demonstrate so-called microevolution. And the first mechanism they list is genetic mutation, where they have a diagram showing 2 green-colored beetles and 1 brown beetle. And the text says, some green genes randomly mutated to brown genes, Although since any particular mutation is rare, this process alone cannot account for a big change in allele frequencies over one generation. Now, what's important to note here is they don't really describe exactly how this mutation resulted in a new color of beetles. And note, the beetles are still beetles. Now, while this may sound like the kind of mechanism that evolution requires, the creation of something new, note that brown beetles already existed. Even if this were some kind of unique change outside of these beetles' normal range of variation, the similar types of color changes we've studied in other creatures have always been the result of an information suppressing or information damaging mutation, not an information increasing one. For example, blue eyes in humans are due to a mutation causing less production of the normal amount of brown pigment in human eyes. So the new color isn't because of brand new genetic information. It's due to a lack of something that used to be there. Also, red flowers that get a mutated gene have been observed producing pink flowers because of the lack of pigment that they normally produce. We've even seen normally lighter flowers that get a mutation that damages a regulatory gene, causing pink flowers to produce much darker colored variations due to the overproduction of something that used to be more controlled. But again, none of these examples result in the creation of anything truly new. It's because things that used to work got broken. Berkeley's next example is migration, or what they call gene flow. And in their diagram, they show 5 brown beetles traveling towards 5 green ones, perhaps indicating that they would then reproduce with one another, with the following caption: "Some beetles with brown genes immigrated from another population," or "Some beetles carrying green genes emigrated." Now, we'd agree that a group of organisms with pre-existing built-in variation might produce more offspring of one type than another because of various factors, such as the dynamic between dominant and recessive genes, for example. Now, if they're simply making the point that if somehow more brown beetles happen to wander into, migrate, an area where more green ones happen to wander out of, emigrate from, then of course there are going to be more brown ones in that area than green ones. Yet again, this isn't an example of anything evolving or anything new coming into existence. Now, their next example of a mechanism for microevolution is genetic drift. And the 3 diagrams they show to demonstrate it are actually pretty funny. The first is simply a group of beetles with equal amounts of both green and brown colors. And the second picture shows someone's sneakers stepping on and squashing some of the green ones, resulting in the third diagram showing a group with more brown than green beetles. The text then says, "When the beetles reproduced, just by random luck, more brown genes than green genes ended up in the offspring." All this example shows is randomness applied to a population. The foot was equally likely to step on green bugs or brown. And in the next generation, randomness might swing the other way, and we might even get more green bugs. Can you see what I'm getting at by mentioning how their definitions of evolution have become diminished to the point of meaninglessness? Look, if there are 100 elephants in a population, 50 with and 50 without tusks, is it evolution if in generation 1 there are randomly 52 without and 48 with tusks, and in generation 2 there are 48 without and 52 with tusks? Because it seems as if in an effort to explain how everything came about by supposed evolution, they're now saying that anything that happens is evolution. The last mechanism they mention is, of course, natural selection. And the diagram they use shows a bird that's munching on green beetles, leaving behind more brown than green ones. And here's what the caption says: "Beetles with brown genes escaped predation and survived to reproduce more frequently than beetles with green genes, so that more brown genes get into the next generation." And to that, I would say, so what? This is like the lame old peppered moth example, or really just a variation on the last example in a more targeted fashion, i.e. random accident versus bird eating habits. But again, Whether through the accidental stepping on by a random sneaker or the result of birds being able to see green beetles easier than brown ones, how can the elimination of something be proof of evolution in action? Now, while it's true that all 4 of these mechanisms may result in beetles with more brown genes surviving, reproducing, and becoming more dominant in subsequent generations, none of them show any type of evolution. How does any of what we talked about here have anything to do with how beetles are supposed to have come into existence in the first place? It's just a big discussion about the survival of the fittest, but nothing to do with the said arrival of those fittest. However, can they be classified as examples of descent with modification? Yes. Can they be labeled as examples of changes in gene frequencies within a population over time? Absolutely. And they also demonstrate that changes can happen in living things. But we already knew that. Is this seriously the best that the #1 university in America, Berkeley, can come up with? Yet I still have evolutionists insisting all the time that evolution has been observed, because they can reference these simplistic examples as proof. The fact is, in practice, the story of evolution has become an answer about where everything supposedly came from. Whether discussing cosmic, geological, chemical, biological, or human evolution, many scientists claim everything that's ever happened in our universe has supposedly come about through the inherent abilities and processes that are found in nature, not by any sort of creator. And we can see as much when we read the Humanist Manifesto, which is basically a written creed for humanists and atheists. Humanists regard the universe as self-existing and not created. Humanism believes that man is part of nature and that he emerged as a result of a continuous process. As non-theists, we begin with humans, not God, nature, not deity. Now, the applicable term applied to performing science under this ideology is called methodological naturalism, which is akin to teaching atheism, because under this paradigm, invoking God at any time when looking at the natural world is automatically dismissed by definition. So it's really no wonder that many naturalists insist there's no evidence for God's existence, because evidence for his existence, or even evidence of design in nature by any higher power, is simply not allowed from the outset. As the immunologist Scott Todd pointed out in a letter published in Nature magazine, even if all the data point to an intelligent designer, such a hypothesis is excluded from science because it's not naturalistic. With state-run schools and media in the West teaching that ideology most of the time, what they're really teaching is atheism as science. So is it any wonder we've seen such a rise of atheism and a corresponding lack of church attendance and affiliation over the last 100 years in what were once considered Christian countries in the past? However, more and more people are starting to see through the equivocation and misleading terminology that evolutionists have been using to convince people to believe in their non-scientific worldview. And we'll continue to point it out whenever we can. If evolutionists continue to present these laughable examples of so-called microevolution as observational evidence for their story about where everything came from, well, so be it. It'll only help expose them and their worldview for what they truly are. Evolution is simply a story desperate to exclude the creator of everything, whom the evolutionists are responsible to and will one day give an account of their life. So once again, believers can be confident in the Genesis account of creation and understand there's absolutely nothing contradictory in the world of true science with what the Word of God says. Indeed, the sum of your word is truth, and every one of your righteous rules endures forever. Psalm 119, 160.